with this today, inshallah. So who can remind us? Who can remind us from last week? We talked briefly, okay? We talked briefly about Hamza and Alif. So these are the same letters of the Quran. So they are different letters. So Hamza is a letter, the Alif is a letter. Can anyone tell me one difference between Hamza and Alif? So I know you guys are with me.
You don't pronounce Alif, but you pronounce Hamza.
Great, excellent. Who says the Aliyah, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So Alif is not having a sound. Alif is not being pronounced. Alif does not get pronounced. However, Hamza get pronounced. Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. I like that. Who else want to give us? I mentioned something else. Is that all I said about Hamza and Alif last week? Yeah. So
I'm
Hamza
pretty
does
sure
not.
that's all you said.
You said what?
I'm pretty sure that's all you told us. Except
Yeah.
that if Aleph has a letter on top of it, then it's now Hamza.
Great. So when when Alif has a sound on it, so it has any sound. So Fatha, Kasra, it would now be pronounced as Hamza. And then we talked about Hamza, having to sit on top of Alif. Okay? Hamza having to be at the bottom of an Alif. Hamza having to sit on top of a Wa, or Hamza having to sit on top of a Ya. You guys remember that? And so we said when you see that, you see Hamza, you say what?
We're in class. We're in class.
When you see Hamza, on top of an Alif. So are you going to pronounce the Hamza or the Alif, Khalid? When you see a Hamza on top of an Alif, are you pronouncing the Alif or the Hamza?
Hamza.
Hamza. So Ridwan, when you see a Hamza on top of a Ya,
Using the bathroom.
okay, or Aliyah, when you see the Hamza on top of a Ya, are you pronouncing the Alif or the Ya or the Hamza?
Um,
When you see a Hamza on top of a Ya or on top of a Wa, okay, are you going to pronounce the Hamza or the Wa or the Ya?
Yeah.
No. Anytime you see Hamza on top of a Wa or on top of a Ya, you always pronounce the Hamza. Okay? So Hamza can be on top of Alif, like we all see it every time. Hamza can be on top of a Wa. Okay? In that scenario, Hamza is going to pronounce. Or Hamza can be on top of a Wa, of a Ya, or at the bottom of a Ya. You see here. So we all see here that Hamza is at the bottom of this Ya, right? Right? You see that? So you're not pronouncing the Ya. You will pronounce the word Hamza. So these are 4 things you need to know about Hamza. Hamza, Alif will not have a sound, which is Alif will not have a sound. So Alif is always used for elongation, right? To stretch the sound of the letter. Hamza will be the one that have the sound. So you see Hamza on top of an Alif. You see Hamza at the bottom of an Alif. You see Hamza on the top of a Wa or at the bottom of a Wa. Or you see Hamza at the bottom of a Ya or on the top of a Ya. So in any case, when you see the Hamza on top of any letter or at the bottom, you will pronounce the Hamza instead. So this is something that you need to know. It's really important. It's a rule of thumb you need to know. Okay, so Hamza is pronounced instead. So I want to talk about when Hamza or Hamzatul Wasl, which is the one we started learning. Okay, this kind of alif here. When is it going to be pronounced and when will it not be pronounced? So how many types of Hamza do we say we have here? Who's gonna read to me here? Aliyah. How many types of Hamza do we say here that we're having?
2.
2. What's the first one, Khalid?
The first one is 2.
What is it called?
Hamzatul Wasl.
Okay, yeah, that's the one. It's called Hamzatul Wasl. The second one is what?
Hamzatul Qata.
Qata', right? Okay, Hamzatul Qata' is an Hamza. Okay, Hamzatul Qata' is an Hamza that we all know, which is the one we all know. This Hamza, this letter Hamza. It's always be like that. It's not gonna change at all, anytime. Okay, and that's why the image is there. This is the normal Hamza. So there are two types of Hamza. You guys are not. Are you listening? Are you hearing this for the first time, right? That there are two types of Hamza, right? We've already moved from saying there's a difference between an Alif and Hamza, and I want to talk about the types of Hamza that we have in the Quran. And so listen very carefully today, so you understand this stuff very well. So Hamza, you will see it in two types in the Quran. Hamza, which is the normal one that you're gonna see. And you will see an Hamza written like this as well. When it's written this way, it's called what? What is it called? It's called Alif al-Wasli or Hamzatul Wasl. What did I call it, Ridwan? Is Ridwan there? Ridwan, are you there?
Yes.
Yeah. So when Hamza is written this way, what is it called?
Aliful Wasl.
Or what?
Hamzatul Wasl.
Great. Have you guys heard of this before?
No.
No. Yeah. You need to learn this so that you be an expert yourself, so you can read the Quran and know what to do when you see this. Especially this one here. This is what the bulk of discussion today will be on, this Hamzatul Wasli or Alif al-Wasli. You already all know this. This one, there's no any issue about it. When you see it, we already talked about it last week. So we're not talking about this one today. We already talked about this one last week. We already talked about this kind of Hamza. So we already talked about it, that this Hamza, okay, when you see it on top of a wa, you're gonna pronounce the wa or this Hamza. The one. When you see this kind of Hamza on top of a wa, are you gonna pronounce the wa or the Hamza? When you see this kind of Hamza, the normal Hamza, when you see it on top of a wa or on top of an alif or on top of a ya, are you pronouncing this Hamza or those letters?
The Hamza.
You pronounce the Hamza. Okay, so you pronounce those, you will not pronounce those letters. You will not pronounce the alif that you see the Hamza on top of it or at the bottom of it. You will not pronounce the ya when you see the Hamza on top of it or you see it at the bottom. You will not pronounce the wa when you see the Hamza on top of it or at the bottom. The Hamza will always be pronounced when you see it on top or at the bottom of those three letters. Okay? So Hamza, that one is good. We already know that. So this kind of second kind of Hamza, the Hamzatul Wasli, is the one we want to talk about today. Okay? So this is called Aliful Wasli, or Hamzatul Wasli. Right? So this one is normal, we know that. This Aliful Wasli or Hamzatul Wasli is a bit tricky. It's a bit tricky. And that is why we need to learn it. So you know how you pronounce it and what to pronounce it with. Are you pronouncing with a fatha when you say it? Or are you going to pronounce it with a kasr? Or are you going to pronounce it with a dhamma? How do you pronounce it? How do you pronounce it? So that's the question. So we'll talk about it now. Any question before I move forward? Everyone understood right now that we have two kind of Hamza, right?
Yes.
The Duan and Aliyah. You know that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we have two types of Hamza. We have the Hamzatul Wasli and Hamzatul Qata'. So the normal one, which is the one we know it's normal, it's going to be pronounced. We see it on top of a wa, we pronounce it. We see it on top of a ya, we pronounce it instead. We're going to have an example. We see it on top of a ya or an alif or at the bottom, we pronounce the Hamza. But this kind of Hamza, there are some situations where we will not pronounce this Hamza, this type of Hamzatul Wasli.
Oh, yeah.
And there are situations where we'll have to pronounce it a must. So the one that is most tricky is, when are we going to pronounce it and what are we going to use to pronounce it? Are we pronouncing it with a fatha when we say it? It doesn't have any fatha, kasra, or whatever, This Hamza will have it on. But this one here, it always be like this in the Quran, like this. In the situations that it needs to be pronounced and when it doesn't need to pronounce. So the Alif al-Wasli is called what? It's called the connecting Alif. They call it connecting Alif. Right? So this is the snapshot. You guys seen the screen, right?
Yeah.
Right? The two types of Hamza, these are the ones in the Quran. Okay? So the Hamzatul Qata', we know that. So the Hamzatul Wasli is also called the connecting. What do I call it? Someone is making it. The Alif al-Wasli, is called the connecting Hamza, or the Alif al-Wasli, the Hamzatul Wasli, that's the English name, the connecting Hamza. And it will have this kind of symbol. When you see the Hamza at the Alif, it's going to have something like this. Like, how do I pronounce this? You know, sometimes it will be in the beginning of the word, or it will be in the middle of the word. So how do you pronounce it? So this Haliful Wasli is pronounced. It only appears like this. When it appears, the second kind of Hamza, it's like an alif with a small sword on top of it. Okay? It will appear in the beginning of words of the Quran. It only appears in the beginning of words. Or sometimes it appears in between words. It appears in the beginning of words of the Quran. And you see it in the middle of words as well. Most often time it is to be in the beginning. It will not have any vowel sound. It will not have fatha. It will not have kesra. It will not have dhamma. It will not have sukun. What are you going to use to pronounce it then if you need to pronounce it? Okay? Most often time it's not pronounced. But when you have to pronounce it, how do you pronounce it? So let's go into that. Any question?
No.
Right? Okay, so we already learned about the difference of the distinction earlier last week. Okay, so Alif Wasli. Okay, so it's called the connecting Hamza. Okay, the connecting Hamza. It will occur in the beginning of words or noun, the verb, any kind of word. You know, you guys know the meaning of word in English. So word is any verb, noun, any kind of part of speech, right? And you see it as an alif and a small sword on top of it like this. Have you all seen this before in the Quran? Anyone? Have you seen this kind of? Have you seen this before?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you get confused how to pronounce it when you see it, or you pretty much know how to pronounce it? When you're
I get
reading,
confused.
you get confused. Who's that? Is it Khalid said that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, how do I pronounce this? I'm gonna pronounce the fatha. I'm not gonna pronounce it. You're gonna pronounce the kesser or not. Yeah. So in some scenarios, you will not even pronounce it at all. Okay. So the Hamzatul Wasli, which is this one, which is called the connecting Hamza, it will be pronounced sometimes. In many cases, it will be skipped and never be pronounced. Okay. So when will it be pronounced? It will be pronounced when you see it. You see this kind of Hamza? When you see it in the beginning of the word. Okay. So you're starting to read an ayah of the Quran and you see it, you need to be able to pronounce it with a sound. But you don't know the sound that you used to pronounce. Is it a fatha or a kesra? I don't know. So we talk about what will determine is if it's going to have a fatha or a kesra or a dhamma. So when Hamzatul Wasli, this kind of Hamza, anytime it's being pronounced is whenever it's in the beginning of the word. Okay? So you're beginning an ayah of the Quran, you're reciting the Quran, and you see the first letter in there of that ayah. You get to pronounce it out. Or whenever you're reading the Quran and you stop, and the next word you're going to pronounce is having to start with this kind of Hamza, you got to pronounce it as well. Right? So in the situations where it will not be skipped, it will not be pronounced that it's going to be skipped, is when you have it in a continuous recitation, right? You're reading, you're not stopping. You're not starting a new ayah, you're reading in the middle of recitation, it will not be pronounced. Or whenever it's in the middle of a word, okay, it will not be pronounced as well. Any question? Any question about the Hamzatul Wasl? Pay attention to it. A lot of adults do not know how to pronounce this. A lot of people can read, they say, I can read the Quran, but they don't know how to pronounce this Hamzatul Wasl. They don't know how you pronounce it with the fatha, you pronounce it with the kasra, you're going to pronounce it with the dhamma. When are you going to pronounce it? What are you not going to pronounce it? So this is a very important topic you guys are learning today. It's a bit advanced a little bit, right? But it's something anyone who wants to be a fluent reciter of the Quran must know. Otherwise, you will not pronounce Quran correctly. Especially with this kind of Hamza. It will not have any sound, but how do you determine you're going to pronounce it or not? Most often time people will pronounce it with the fatha, which is not right sometimes. Most often time people will pronounce with the fatha. They pronounce this kind of Hamza with the fatha. They'll just say ah, but it's not ah, right? It's not always ah. So how many situations are we going to pronounce it? Who's going to tell me from what I've said here, Khalid? When are we going to pronounce the Hamzatul Wasl?
You're gonna pronounce at the beginning of a word.
Yeah, at the beginning of a word when you're starting to read an ayah. Okay? So you're going to pronounce it. Or whenever you stop in the recitation of an ayah and the next word to read is starting with Hamzatul Wasl. So Aliyah, when are you not going to be pronouncing the Hamzatul Wasl? In what situation are you going to skip it?
When it appears in continuous when it appears in continuous
Recitation, right? When it's in a continuous recitation, right?
Mhm.
And you have an ayah, you have a letter before it, or whenever it's in the middle of a word. So whenever it's continuous, it's not the only letter that you have to pronounce to start reading a word. It's not. So whenever it's in the middle of a recitation or it's in the middle of a word, you will not pronounce it. So you don't have to pronounce it in those scenarios. So you're gonna skip it. But scenarios where you're gonna pronounce it whenever it's starting a word, or you want to pronounce a word, and that's the only letter that starts that word, and that is when you will pronounce it. So let's give an instance here. Okay. So here now, you will skip Hamzatul Wasl here. You skip here. So this is the Hamzatul Wasl. You all can see it, right? Now, this Hamzatul Wasl is in the middle of the recitation. So if we are reading, I want someone to read this ayah. I want Ridwan, read this ayah here.
Okay.
So this is an example of a time when we will skip pronouncing Hamzatul Wasl. You all know what Hamzatul Wasl is. This is this one. We're gonna skip it. So how do you read this ayah, Ridwan? Is Ridwan there? أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم على الأرائك ينظرون
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 ينظرون على الأرائك ينظرون. So you see here, say it again, one. Read the ayah again.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم على الأرائك ينظرون.
Good, great. So you see here, Ridwan didn't pronounce this alif al-wasl here. So it will be skipped. Why? Because it's in the middle of a recitation, like in a continuous recitation. Or whenever it's in the middle of a word like this. So I want Khalid to read this ayah here.
Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصل لربك
That is fact.
فصل لربك وانهر.
One har. So you will not say wa anhar, right? You didn't say that. I'm just saying you will not say wa anhar. You say one har. So it's not pronounced out. It's not pronounced out. So those are the two situations you will keep pronouncing the Hamzatul Wasli whenever it's in a continuous recitation. You're not stopping. Or whenever it's in the middle of an eye, you will not pronounce it. You will not pronounce it. You will not pronounce it. And so this is a long ayah. وَأَنَّا أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ وَأَنَّا كُنَّا نَقْعُدُ مِنْهَا مَقَاعِدَ لِلسَّمْعِ فَمَنْ يَسْتَمِعْ الْآنَ. So you see this Hamza not pronounced. The alif, the lam is pronounced with the con. يَسْتَمِعْ الْآنَ يستمع الآن يستمع الآن, right? So the Hamzatul Wasl is not pronounced in between that. فمن يستمع الآن يجد له شهابا رصدا, right? So the Hamzatul Wasl is not pronounced. So when Hamzatul Wasl is in the middle of a recitation, like Ridwan read it and like Khalid read it, you will not pronounce it. Here in the middle of a word, it's not pronounced. In the beginning, continuous recitation of an ayah, you're not stopping. You will not pronounce it. What about when it's going to be pronounced? Right? So all this, you will not pronounce it. You will not pronounce it. But when Hamzatul Wasli is going to be pronounced, What do you do? So when it's going to be pronounced, we're going to learn the rules of pronunciation next week. So it's going to be pronounced with fatha in some scenarios. It's going to be pronounced with kasra in some scenarios. In some scenarios, it's going to be pronounced with dhamma when it needs to be pronounced. You see? So we'll continue with that on that next week. I'm taking it bit by bit. Okay? So next week, we're going to go through when is it going to be pronounced with the fatha? When is it going to be pronounced with the kasra? When will it be pronounced with the dhamma? You know, like I'll give you an example before we leave tonight, today. And so someone can try to read that for me. So everyone knows that when you pronounce this, how do you read this one here? Ali, how do you read this? How do you read it?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد
How do you pronounce it?
لله
Is it A or A or what?
الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Great. Why do you say Alhamdu? Does the Alif has a fatha, or do you just pronounce because you heard people say it?
No, because it's, even though it's an alif, it has a hamza, so you only pronounce hamza.
Okay, it has the Hamzatul Wasl, right? That we're not going to pronounce, right? It has it.
Mhm.
But we said Alhamdu because the lam here has a sukun. We said we pronounce the Hamza with the A. Why do we pronounce it with the A? Do you know why? Huh?
No.
Yeah. So we've had people reciting it Alhamdu, which is correct, right? But you don't know why are they? Do you see Alif on it? Do you see a Fatha on it? Why you pronounce it A?
No.
Ridwan, do you see Fatha on it? Why do you pronounce it as A? Instead. Or what gave you that impression to pronounce it as Alhamdu? Why do you do that?
Because of the letter on top of it.
What is that letter? There's no letter on top of the symbol.
Yeah.
Is it a Fatha?
No.
No. So you only give the letter A sound when it has a Fatha. But this is not having a Fatha. Okay, this is not having a Fatha, but it's pronounced with A. Okay?
That's Hamza?
It doesn't Hamza, but it's not having Fatha.
What?
It's Hamzatul Wasl. All right? It's Hamzatul Wasl, like we've been learning, but it doesn't have a sound to pronounce it with. So why and how do we determine it's going to be pronounced with the Fatha? Well, this one here, we say Alhamdulillah again, we pronounce the Fatha. Alladhina, why do we pronounce that as well the Fatha? They don't have Fatha on top of them, but we still pronounce them with Fatha. Or here, or many examples that we're going to check out. Like, how do you pronounce this one then, with one? Oh, Aliyah, who's going to pronounce this? How do you pronounce this one here?
Andur.
You say Andor. Yeah, that's not correct, right?
It's
And
not?
that's what I'm saying, that it doesn't have a fatha, but why are you pronouncing with a fatha? Okay? And this one here, who's going to pronounce this one? Aliyah, how do you pronounce this?
You need to pick.
How do you pronounce that? How do you pronounce that word?
أعوذ بالله.
Is it going to be what? Just this word, how do you pronounce it? You know, it's starting the ayah, but the alif that comes, the first letter is not having even any sound to pronounce it to it, right? This is a small sword denoting Hamzatul Wasl. But how do we pronounce it? What sound are we going to use to pronounce it?
الصد.
Huh?
الصد.
Yeah, so we cannot pronounce with a sword. Okay, we'll talk about it next week, inshallah. So we can pronounce this alif with either a fatha or kasra or dhamma, depending on some things. So that's what we're going to talk about next week, inshallah. So this one's going to be unzuru. You know, there's no dhamma there. I just said unzuru. Where is the dhamma coming from? I said udi'u. This is how you pronounce udi'u. But there's no dhamma. Where is the dhamma coming from? Okay. So this is what we'll learn next week, inshallah. Make sure you join the class. Are you excited to know about how to pronounce them next week?
Yes.
Yeah. It's so very tricky, right? Like here now, you see this Hamzatul Wasl, you're like, how do I pronounce this one here? Is it going to be Ashtaru? No, that's not correct. You cannot say astaghfir. You cannot say that. That's not right. But you're like, what am I not gonna use to pronounce it then? Inshallah, next week we'll talk about it. So I'll delay the quiz to next week. I do have a class with some students right now. So we'll walk through those rules, which is what we're gonna finish discussing next week about the rules of pronouncing Hamzatul Wasl when it needs to be pronounced. When it needs to be pronounced. Okay, we already know now, just recap what we've learned today. Okay, Hamzatul Wasl, all right, is the second kind of Hamza. We have two types of Hamza. We have the normal one, we have the Hamzatul Wasl, which is the one that's called the connecting Hamza. Okay, and this Hamza, it's either pronounced, when it's pronounced, there are 3 rules to determine what sound do you pronounce it with. Is it Fatha, Kasra, or Dhamma? And when you don't pronounce it, it has 2 situations. When it's in the middle of a recitation, or whenever it's in the middle of a word, you don't pronounce it at all. But when it's pronounced, how do you determine what sound is it going to have? We'll talk about that next week, inshallah. Any question before I leave today? Ridwan, do you like to know what to use to pronounce it?
Yes.
What about Aliyah? You want to know what to use to pronounce it?
Yes.
What about Khalid?
Yes.
Yeah, inshallah. I have a call right now, so we'll not be able to do the quiz. I promise, inshallah, we'll do it next week. And we'll go over the rules of pronouncing the Hamzatul Wasl and when it needs to be pronounced. We'll see you all next week, Sunday, inshallah, at the same time. Join the expert Quran readers group. I think you've joined it, Khalid or any of you. And so we can be able to learn together and watch the videos of the classes after it's ended as well, inshallah. I'll see you all next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.